maybe that's been the biggest shift for the creative industries, that there is, and I definitely feel that pressure of, okay, so what can we do next to remain sustainable?
And I wonder if the execution becomes easier with things like AI and stuff like that, and quicker, then maybe there'll be more honesty in that kind of unknown area.
Welcome back to Crafted Reality, a podcast by Yellow Brick, with me, Ali John, and my partner in crime, Julian Sykes. So folks, this is the beginning of season 2, and in this episode we take a trip down memory lane and reflect back on 2025 and the podcast as a whole. Unbelievably, we've been going for 2 years now, so a little bit of a celebration and a little bit of a meandering ramble from us this time. In our conversation, we hint at a new project that we will be discussing in episodes in 2026, so keep an eye out for those. Remember to like and subscribe and share Crafted Reality with anyone that you think might be interested. And don't forget, we've got that Patreon, so please check the show notes for the link. All of your support is very, very welcome. So without further ado, let's get into it.
So season 2, weirdly, let's start with a wrap-up of 2025.
Yeah, wrap-up of 2025 sounds good. It sort of feels like this year has gone so quick. And I think I say that to myself every year, like, how is it November already? But, you know, here we are, end of 2025. A wrap-up begins. So I guess season 1 we had 27 episodes of Crafted Reality, some which were kind of long episodes per month, or some that we'd broken into little mini episodes that were released each week, which was kind of really exciting. So, for example, for The Field, we did a 4 to 5 part mini series with Heaven Robinson, debriefing and discussing our audio project, The Field. So I guess a question for you: when we decided to start this podcast, did you think that we would have what is a year and a bit under our belt so far?
I mean, it's hard to know, isn't it? I guess not really. I think the thing that we have spoken about off camera or off microphone as such is that I think one of the reasons for me why I've kept doing it is that there's 2 parts to it, in a sense, where it kind of makes you think about how you work and your process. You know, it's kind of, because you're hearing from someone who's generally, I guess, slightly to the side of where you work, it's kind of interesting and fascinating to understand how people work and what they're up to and stuff like that. So for a purely selfish reason, I think that's maybe one reason why I've kind of continued to be in, you know, like, for us to do interviews. And I was going to say the second one, but I can't remember what the second one was now. I guess it's this kind of reoccurring thing that we've been talking about, and maybe we'll talk about in a bit, about compression, and how everything's getting quicker and quicker and quicker, and everything's getting compressed. And actually these moments are quite refreshing because they're not compressed. They're a conversation. They last between 1 and 2 hours. Someone comes who's like, we haven't seen in a while. It's kind of good to catch up just more generally. And then it's kind of then interesting to dwell in that time, and not compress. So I think there's kind of those 2 bits that I think maybe specifically some of the reasons why I've kind of like kept going or wanting to continue with the podcast. How about you?
Yeah, I love the idea of the slow time, which I think has come up quite a few times during some of the conversations that we've had with guests that we've had on the podcast. So yeah, I think that idea of extending, elongating time is a really nice way to frame it, because I think when we talked about the podcast and editing the podcast, when we first started, we talked a lot about how long should the episodes be? Should they be 20 minutes? Should they be half an hour? How long are people's attention spans these days? And I think we'd made the decision to not necessarily worry about that too much. That if the conversation was an hour and a half, 2 hours, yeah, for sure, we're going to do some editing within that. However, the conversation is sort of the conversation, and allowing listeners, people who are perhaps watching on YouTube, to also dwell within that conversation, maybe listen to it in one go or come back to it. So, yeah, I think it's sort of like an anti content consumption, or anti-content consumption behavior that we've got maybe in relation to social media. It is that dwell and luxuriating in that conversation. And then I guess, similar to you, I think it's really fascinating to have the opportunity to be able to talk to these amazing creatives about their process, about their creativity, about what they are inspired by, which, fundamentally is inspiring in itself. So I guess we're very, very grateful to everybody that has been on the podcast to date, given their time and shared their expertise with us, and obviously the people who are our crafted reality-ers.
Yeah, I think I definitely second some of that. And in relation to people who we might want to get on in the future, then do let us know in the comments if there are some people that you feel you'd like to recommend, and we can see if we can get them in. I definitely think we will be doing a series initially around about a project that we're going to be doing for most of 2026, which we'll kind of get to in a bit. And then I think we're going to be looking at some more specific writers potentially initially over the start of 2026. While we have had writers up to this point, I don't think we've ever had a writer that is writing in a book form or something like that. We've had mainly done within the realms of theatre. So Heaven and Hannah spring to mind. So it'll be interesting to see what the kind of, again, similarities, differences are, and maybe how they see the future in that respect. So we're definitely broadening it out a little bit, but if there are specific people that you feel would fit the Crafted Reality podcast, then do let us know, and we'll see if we can get it or get them.
Capture them like Pokemon.
Capture them. I think, it's definitely been a challenge to do one a month.
Yes.
In some ways, I think it's actually too much of a gap, because it's quite hard to get a routine in a month. But then doing the obvious one then is one a week, and that becomes a very heavy investment.
Unless you kind of end up splitting quite a long podcast into 4 sections, which we have done, I guess, with the field, where they've been our mini series to 10, 15, 20 minutes, which I think are kind of quite nice sort of bite-sized chunks for like people. And
I guess to your point earlier as well, again, if there is a length of time that people think the podcast could be or should be, because I guess I listen to podcasts that are 30 minutes and listen to podcasts that are 2 hours, depending on what you're doing around it. But if there are particular time frames that people think might be more popular, then maybe that would be the case, where we're doing a podcast that is 2 hours, but then breaking it up, maybe around subject or, definitive acts within that podcast. So do let us know as well, whether you think there is any changes to that as well.
So in terms of our 2025 episodes and beyond, what themes do you think have naturally emerged across these episodes in season 1 to date? I prepped some questions, by the way.
Oh, good. The one that I didn't think that I was really that interested in, but looking back or listening back to the podcast that I seem to always ask is about process and about how people see process and do process and things like that. And I guess if there was one thing with regards to that, it's most people's processes are pretty robust, but fundamentally no one knows what they're really doing. They're all kind of like on catch up, and I guess that's part of that creative process of kind of like finding out, not knowing and trying to find out through a process. Maybe we've specifically, because we've been talking to people, have then reflected back more. So sometimes there may be people don't seem to be necessarily aware that they're using a process or have never articulated it. They've just kind of done it naturally, or they've effectively created a groove that they've kind of gone down repeatedly, therefore made a process. So I think that's maybe the one theme by default that's been interesting to hear, the similarities, differences, that kind of stuff. And that's definitely the most interesting for me when I'd probably say a group has been totally different to what we make or have made, and yet you can literally see almost the exact same processes people are going through. The most distant has been speaking to Lals Cotton about their process, because it's such a different thing with the amount of people that are involved and the duration of a project being, someone could write it and it couldn't, it doesn't go anywhere for years and then kind of gets picked up. So yeah, I think that's for me. What about you?
I think the insane kind of skill set that people have, and multiple skills and huge kind of touch points of experience and then knowledge all in one. I think that, like, across everybody I think that we've interviewed has this multidisciplinary background that has enabled them to understand quite a broad range of things to then inform their work. And then I suppose within that, this playfulness or appetite for playfulness, and then also I think like playful generosity to also work with other people and collaborate and share. And then, obviously then come onto this podcast and be generous enough then to share their time, share their expertise and share their knowledge as well. So I think, those things are definitely themes across all of the episodes and people that we've had conversations with. And I think I loved, in terms of, we're talking about process, when we spoke to Danny about their process, that this amazing willingness to just take brilliant risks and just do stuff. And I think I was really inspired by that, where often I think my default is to maybe try stuff out, but there's still a lot of editing happening, where his process was very much like, let's just do it and see what finds out. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. And I just love that just enthusiasm, just to see what happens, and it doesn't really matter, does it? So I was massively inspired after that conversation with Danny about his approach, which I think was kind of really, really, really refreshing. Yeah, that was probably one that stuck in my mind. And actually, one of the questions I'd written down, which would be kind of really interesting, what has sort of stuck with you after speaking to all of these people that maybe you've maybe carried forward, either as a seed that has kind of grown over the last few months, or something that maybe you've implemented in your work, or has made you think differently about maybe some of the stuff that you do in your creative practice?
Oh God.
Notice I'm taking the role of the interviewer here.
Yeah, I know. That's a super hard question.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I think if there was one thing, I'd probably go back a little bit to what I was kind of touching on earlier. And I think it's if you're in a big organization or an individual doing their thing, I think And I hope maybe this will kind of get more and more the case. But I feel like the idea that you are winging it, and maybe winging it isn't the correct term, but the actual idea that you're challenge yourself into the unknown to make something. You're not repeating something over and over again and kind of like effectively you know exactly what you're going to do apart from that last bit. And I think that across the board is, there are projects out there that people are just like exploring. And I guess we all do that. But I guess the kind of interesting thing for me is whether people own up to that. That kind of boast and bluff and things. And I wonder if the execution becomes easier with things like AI and stuff like that and quicker, then maybe there'll be more honesty in that kind of unknown area, and there'll be more discussion around there. Because I wonder if let's say you spent 3 months doing something previously and it's not so good, and people, no matter what people say, they judge the end point, not the process, as both internally and people looking in. But if that's taken a few days, then maybe you're less precious with it, and maybe you can kind of like share and get feedback. So I wonder if maybe there'll be a bit of more of an honesty, which maybe would be really interesting to explore. People being honest with how they're approaching, more honest with and more transparent with how they're approaching things. I think, and this is a conversation that you had this week with someone with regard to one of the projects we're working on at the moment. I think there's a lot of bluster and a lot of propaganda almost, where you can't admit to failure because no matter if it's like try something, fail fast, whatever. I guess in this economy, it's kind of you've still got to show yourself as being relatively successful. Yeah, so I don't know, maybe something like that. Yeah, how about you? You should have been ready for that question. Basically, the question is just, and how about you?
And what about you? The tables can't turn if you want to ask me any questions up front. I think
it's such a good question. I definitely should ask you that one.
Absolutely ask you that question, because it's the hardest question. I think reflecting back on the conversations that we had with Lisa Hallett-Jones, and we did 2 brilliant episodes. We ended up splitting the conversation into 2 episodes with Lisa. And I think talking with Lisa, maybe that reminded me of doing projects just for the sake of doing something that you're passionate about and something that you're interested in. So she talked a lot about she works with sound and does many other brilliant things, but she's been doing sound recordings of the place where she lives and family conversations and sort of situations, not for any particular project or outcome. It's just something that she's doing and collecting, and it brings her, I think, a sense of joy, and I think, without putting words into Lisa's mouth, it sparks that inquiry into the world around you, and maybe being reminded of like doing those things are so important beyond projects that you have to do for an output within your day to day.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Those passion projects, I guess you would call them. They don't have a purpose, I'm doing air quotes now, for a client or
they definitely don't have an out. They don't necessarily definitively have an output. That anyone else but you experiences.
Yeah,
which I think is kind of like, yeah, you're right. It's interesting.
I think that's kind of that, and I'm just being reminded of that because I then reflected back on, so what am I doing that's kind of the equivalent of that is kind of feeding my playfulness, my inquiry, my curiosity. It's kind of almost exercising that muscle, but it's obviously very enriching beyond then my day-to-day, work with Yellow Brick or, other work that I'm taking on. What am I doing in my time that does that? And I'm not sure that I currently do anything like that.
Yeah,
I used to do that.
I was just thinking the same.
But
yeah.
I don't. And that was kind of quite a big wake-up call for me, actually. And it's made me reflect on, actually, what are the things that I really enjoy making that don't need, they don't have that output. They're just for me. What is that? And I think that's so important. So I think that's something that I'm going to think about a little bit more, to spend my time maybe a little bit more, not wisely, that's not the correct word, but spend my time that gives me that sense of enrichment creatively. And maybe I've lost that. It's
interesting because it's very similar when you think about it. It's kind of very similar to Danny's work, isn't it? But in the sense that he's chucking it public. But there's no, I don't mean this in a negative way, there's no strategy behind it to say, well, this, then this. Yeah, it's right, actually. And it's a problem more generally, I guess, within making things, where if you're making something and you're building on it over time, then in some shape or form, you would imagine logically that that's going to get a little bit more complicated or require more time or more people or something. So it's kind of like, what are the projects you can do that kind of simmer, say almost the same size, can be put out in the world, but don't have to be. Yeah, it kind of feels like it reminds me of when we started making games and things. Like there was never, and then we can do this, this, and this, and this. We definitely did ramp it up and made bigger games. But yeah, that freedom of that feels kind of really interesting to explore for sure. And being able to almost, like, if someone says to you, why are you doing that? Just instead of defensively kind of saying, I'm not sure, like, just, well, it's learning.
It brings me joy.
Yeah, but I mean, maybe it doesn't though as well, I guess is what I'm saying. Like, it doesn't have to. I don't think joy is the only reason you're doing it, right? Like, learning without an endpoint, I think, is just as valid. Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I could go with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are you now looking at my questions on my screen?
I'm trying to see, but the font size is just a little bit too small, because I'm trying to do you over by asking you a question. We're quite far down, actually. What? Oh wow, that's a good question. I'm glad no one asked me that so far. Okay. I'm kind of paraphrasing this question here. So in terms of the conversations we had, which I guess were over 2 years.
Yeah, I guess, technically we are.
Default.
Yeah. I don't know why we waited till season 2 for now. I think we just realised, maybe it's time for a season 2.
Like recap kind of thing. Yeah. Do you think there were particular, and maybe that's because we drove it, and maybe it's because of the projects we were doing at the time, but were there any particular things that you felt kept on coming out? Let me just read it specifically. Or shift-wise in the industry. I mean, it's so bad.
So, like, from the conversations that we had, what has been the shift across the last couple of years that perhaps we've seen?
Like in the industry.
Yeah,
that's a good question.
Isn't it?
Thanks.
God, it's like somebody's written it.
Yeah.
And I think we've spoken about this a little bit. I suppose for many people, it feels like people are having to diversify even more. So I have just said that I'm so inspired by the amount of skills and knowledge an abundance of different skills and knowledge that a lot of the people that we spoke to, all of the people that we spoke to have. But I kind of feel now creatives, particularly within the creative industries, are kind of under more pressure to have to diversify their work to be able maybe to survive. And that's due to many different things. And again, we've spoken about this before. We're still sort of in the shadow of COVID. We're still in the shadow of Brexit. We're now kind of in a time of austerity. Funding is minimal, and I think people are trying to find new ways to not reinvent themselves, but to maybe look at what they do and make some decisions about what they're going to do in the future, which might mean new skills or looking at a totally different career path for them. So I think maybe that's been the biggest shift for the creative industries, that there is, and I definitely feel that pressure of, okay, so what can we do next to remain sustainable, not only as a kind of producer, artist, but then also as a kind of company and organisation. What are those things that we might have to start thinking about? And I know this is something that you've talked about a lot with me lately, again off camera, off mic, in terms of what does that look like?
Yeah, I guess the other end to look at it is that I guess projects that have gone, like call outs for projects, maybe have had a lot bundled into it. So if we think about, if I'm talking from a Hoffe perspective and being a brand agency specializing in brand and user-centered design, you'd get tenders with that, and then on top of that there's a media campaign bolted on top of it, or marketing, and it's all in one. So I guess there's two bits to that. You've got like a industry that potentially isn't necessarily as knitted together as it used to be. There obviously are groups that know each other and things like that, but then there's been lost contacts and things like that through COVID, and maybe that hasn't got back to pre-COVID levels. So you imagine those kind of call outs are going to likely be kind of collected by the larger agencies that are, claiming that they're going to do all the services. Whether they're doing that or freelancing out is neither here nor there. It's still that's the case. And I guess then maybe that then from the other end as an individual, you're seeing call outs that are, let's say 60 or 70% you, and there's like a bit of a 40%, 30% thing that's just like not really what you do. So I think it's forcing you to kind of potentially scale or move in ways that you wouldn't necessarily want to. And I think it's hard to then say to yourself, well, being true to yourself, staying in where you want to do it when there's no money about. So you kind of go that way, and then I guess before you know it, you're quite far away from where you do 2 or 3 of those projects, and you're quite far away from where you once were. So yeah, I definitely think there's a lot of things out there that are bundling all together, and I think then there are bits out there that are very much in a state of flux, and people being unaware or unsure as to what the next, year is, let alone next 5 or 10 years. And just because you can doesn't necessarily mean to say you should. Maybe. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does, yeah. Yeah, I think those opportunities aren't as maybe obvious as they once were 2 years ago when we started this podcast. So, yeah, I think it's sort of, you're almost doing a little bit more digging to be able then to find those opportunities. They do seem kind of much harder to kind of come across or find. So in the meantime, while you're doing that, I suppose, what are the things that you can be doing that, potentially then do help you create that new skill base within that time that you actually do have? And then what other offerings related to what you do in terms of your core artistic practice or your core artistic output? What are those things that are connected to that, but maybe slightly to the side, that still feel relevant, still feel like they hold the same values, but and are, ideally something that perhaps you would like to do or want to do?
I guess it fundamentally comes down to where you're getting paid, like where your money is coming from. And I think that dictates a lot, doesn't it? Like, so I guess if you're working, and I guess maybe there's almost like three areas to this. There's an individual organization that's getting all of its money to make work, and so therefore all of that employment is purely for the pursuit of that. I guess then you've got a group of people who are working in the arts, but not necessarily, and are artists or makers, but they're not necessarily making arts in the arts kind of thing. They're doing that on a side hustle. And then I guess then you've got people who aren't working in the arts at all, and then they're, as a hobby, if you like, doing art and things like that. And I guess there's that kind of range. Depending on where you are in that range dictates what you could do and where you are, and deciding on whether, I guess like you were saying earlier, whether there's mini projects you can do with people or yourself that doesn't necessarily need that output or doesn't need that show back, if you like, to try and kind of like fulfill yourself. So whether it's joy or learning or whatever, that's enough. I guess that's harder for certain artistic forms. I don't know, like being an actor might be harder to do that than if you're like making something or recording something. So yeah, maybe, I don't know. Yeah.
And then one question that we always ask our guests, which I don't think we've ever really talked about, is what have you read, watched, or listened to lately that has it could go beyond that, has inspired or influenced your creative practice?
Okay, so I mean the thing,
or you could recommend.
Yeah, I mean the thing that I've watched that's got me thinking, that highlighted maybe something I hadn't been able to put my finger on it recently, that I think I'm going to try and be doing more of in 2026, is watching Slow Horses.
Oh, I knew you were going to say that.
Yeah.
It's so good.
Yeah, it's pretty late to the party, really, because, what is it, like 5 seasons in? And I think there's something in it that I've then kind of been looking into from a wider perspective called perceptual realism in film and TV. And I guess perceptual realism is the idea that it feels real, but we know it isn't. And you could say, well, that's kind of like everything, but it's kind of the difference between how something like Slow Horses feels real compared to some of the more recent Marvel films with CGI. And it doesn't mean to say that you can't have CGI in a film. So, for example, Avatar would be a good example of perceptual realism, even though you know it's totally fake. But the world around it feels real. It feels considered, and it kind of textural, if you like. And so within Slow Horses, you've got these very, for me anyway, it feels quite a real representation of Britain. And there is kind of shots in there that have that texture. They emote sensory responses because you're kind of watching someone kind of close up, touching and feeling texture, which is another part of perceptual realism. And so I think that for me has started making me think about the realness of the work that I'd like to make. I don't know yet how that kind of manifests itself or kind of develops itself, but I feel that quite strongly, that I'd like to kind of look at that in the things that we make. And I guess you've kind of like done that for years, but I've never really kind of placed it in that position. So I guess the stuff that you did for St. Fagans, the audio, touching the bush as you go past, and kind of those kind of things. So there is stuff in that we've done previously, and we've always spoken about it in terms of feel, I guess. But I'd like to explore that a bit more. And I guess off of that, weirdly, an example of a game that I've not yet played, but I've watched a lot of videos about in a similar way, Arc Raiders, has, again, for me, has that perceptual realism somehow. Like it's a post-apocalyptic game. But when you kind of see the care and attention that they've built these environments, they feel real and you are getting something from them. It feels considered, just like Avatar. So yeah, I think maybe that would be my thing to do. I have no idea what that means or how to do it, or like what that is. I think if there was one thing, and maybe we'll come to that in the thing we originally spoke about, is maybe trying to not get anxious by trying to compress projects. So taking time to understand things take time. But do push to finish, because I think there's also that other bit of just procrastinating and never doing anything, because you just never...
Well, luxuriating in the process, isn't it? And then not actually, committing.
So how about you?
How about me? I've been reading a lot of books lately. And maybe that's the thing that isn't necessarily a creative practice in terms of me doing something, but, I fell out of kind of reading routine for a while. So I've kind of recently got back into that. And I have been recently reading a lot of books by some Japanese Korean artists. And the writing within those books are really kind of interesting, because everything happens, but then nothing happens in terms of like the narrative, which is kind of really, really interesting. And they sort of feel like very in the moment books, where they are often capturing a moment in time of a person or a group of people, and then it sort of moves on. Maybe those stories across chapters are interconnected, or maybe they're sort of not, or maybe there's a singular thread. But there's something really interesting about those style of books where it's kind of not very dramatic, there's not very much action, but again, like so much happens in terms of like the richness, this sense of connection, this often sense of community, and the thread of a lot of the narratives are, what is it that you can do to change about your life that will kind of bring you that sense of not purpose, but that sense of fulfillment. And that doesn't always mean the thing that you logically think will. So a good job, a well-paid job, a family, you know, those kind of societal norms that perhaps we strive to, when you get a good job, you can get a really nice house. When you get a really nice house, you can do X, Y, and Z. And it sort of pushes back on that quite a lot. And a lot of the things within, I think, across all the novels that I've read recently, push back against that. And then it's about people kind of finding that resolve and actually being at peace then with a kind of alternative route that they knew they always yearned for, but didn't quite pursue, or they didn't realise that the very thing in front of them is the thing that they need, because you're always looking ahead to the future. I will be happy when. I will be happy when I get. I will be happy when I have. And actually a lot of the happiness that you can find is very much then within what you have already. And yeah, they're lovely books. I'll pop a list of them in the show notes. I also did an Instagram post on our Yellow Brick socials, Instagram, that kind of just does a little debrief on these books, but I'll pop a link in the show notes. And maybe the thing I've listened to more recently, which is kind of connected to that, is Meditation for Mortals podcast, which is a book by Oliver Burkeman. That has been really interesting, kind of dissecting and sort of reframing our relationship with productivity, and how it talks a lot about burnout. It talks a lot about, I guess, these restraining things that we weirdly dictate for ourselves, or again society has dictated for us. And he sort of pushes back on a lot of those things related to productivity and what is meaningful when. So those are my two things.
We've not watched it yet, but in the same vein, we're about to watch Perfect Days.
Oh yeah,
which also from the synopsis and looking into that film feels very similar to that, with a Japanese janitor who's, to all intents and purposes, again, haven't seen the film and will report back, but is happy with that job and sees the joy and the joy of that job, which sounds very similar to those books, where it's kind of interesting, isn't it, the stronger, faster thing. And I think that kind of is interesting because it leads us on to the project for 2026 in some ways, where, you know, we're going to be working with a load of people on an AI project. And I think, you have the narrative of AI is going to stop you from needing to work, and everyone will not work and stuff like that. But then equally, if you look at technology more generally, in effect, it's kind of made you just work harder for longer for less potential future. You know, generations are now more unlikely to own a house. And I don't think that's necessarily a good or bad thing, but maybe more importantly, it'll be interesting to see how the generations will be able to live once they stop working, you know, because of the nature of population increase and stuff like that. So I think with AI, I think it's just going to become about efficiency. But the idea that maybe it gives you more time is kind of more interesting.
Yeah, I guess there's two sides to that, isn't it? That AI will give you more time within your working day to technically do more work, rather than the AI doing that task
the
for
same
you.
Task,
the same task for you, actually, to be able to have some time off.
Yeah.
Because it's been, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like, it's doing this, but you still have a shit ton of other tasks to do.
Yeah.
It's just kind of offsetting that task, but then there's other things to do. Not to say that then there's obviously some interesting things within maybe, you know, production, where monotonous jobs, or kind of jobs that kind of could be useful to be automated, you know, there isn't merit in that. But I guess, there's the kind of anti argument then to, well, actually we'll probably end up doing more other things that aren't the task.
I think the monotonous thing is also, or could also be, a hidden negative positive thing though as well, because generally that will be entry level jobs into industry. So how does that start? And I often find, like, I know it's different, we're kind of talking about two different things, but I often find doing monotonous jobs being a really therapeutic kind of way to then restructure things. And so if you're not doing that, are you ever going to have any time to kind of think? So, like, even now we're with Hoffy's almost 20 years. I think next year might be our 20th year, maybe, or the year after. Yeah, I think next year will be our 20th year. And even now, I enjoy every now and again doing an InDesign document and just ploughing through, adding text, styling things up, effectively doing what people would describe as grunt work to that degree. But it's quite nice just to kind of do for a bit where you're not thinking. So you kind of wonder whether it kind of like is doing both ends, like doing this stuff instantaneously, and then also that taking away the stuff that maybe allows you to learn your craft or learn your way of working or understand something. I guess an analogy would be, if you think about a CNC machine. So a CNC machine is a computer operated milling machine that can kind of take a piece of wood, you send it a 3D drawing, and it'll kind of it'll kind of mill it into that 3D drawing. Now you could do that, or you could be a sculptor that's physically kind of like making that piece of wood into the shape. And there's so many kind of like different things around that, isn't there? There's like the individual who's the sculptor gets to know the properties of that wood. They understand that maybe there's a knot there, so it's going to be quite hard and tough to do, or they might even orientate their design based on that knot to kind of avoid that. And you've got those skills, and he or she understands that experience and that creation in a very different way to someone who's just sending the thing from the computer to the CNC machine. But then at the other end of that area, there's a person who's made the 3D model in 3D software, who's obviously got some form of skill base to have done that, and therefore they've understood the materials of the 3D software. So it's those kind of like things, I think, that kind of going to be interesting. I've totally forgotten what we were talking about though.
That's fine. And as you were talking, I was just thinking of something else related to the question before, because I think we were just talking about productivity and AI. Other things that I've read or listened to is your Braver Brands content.
Oh, thank you. Yes, yes, good plug. Right. Great plug.
I know, but genuinely, I think so. Julian has created a Braver Brands newsletter, which
a series of essays
which you can read or listen to, and again, I'll pop in the show notes how you sign up to that newsletter, but I'd highly recommend it because it gives a really great insight and take on kind of branding, and it's sort of like they're thought-provoking, and I would say maybe are offering provocations, really interesting provocations around branding and themes related to it. Is there anything else you'd like to say about that?
No. No, not at all.
I would highly recommend it. It's a brilliant newsletter.
Thank you.
That's okay. So looking ahead,
2026.
What's something that you would like to leave behind in 2025, and what is something that you would like to carry forward into 2026?
Lack of work. Work. It does feel the last few months that things have started to pick up a bit. I don't know if that's just like our group and network. But there does feel like maybe that has started to move forward a little bit more in a positive light. It feels, I mean, again, I can only speak for us and what we've been experiencing over the last few years, but kind of felt actually during COVID there was an abundance of funding for different projects because of the nature of what was happening in the world. That continued maybe for a year or so, and then we've then felt this kind of almost like doldrums, if you like, of the wave. So the wave's kind of like past us. We're in the doldrums, and it felt like there's not been much out there. And I don't really just mean about actual projects. I mean just generally stuff to go and see and experience. And I think now, for me at least anyway, maybe I'm just become better at looking, or maybe it's true. It feels to be starting to get busier, starting to get more interesting things happening. So yeah, I think lack of work and I guess work, or lack of inspiration and I guess inspiration, if I was going to say for the 2025, 2026. We've started walking into work a bit over the last few months, which I think also makes a difference. So maybe I'll just continue walking. I enjoy walking, and I think it gives, again, it's all about compression, isn't it? It gives you time to not compress. It takes ages to get to work. I mean, it's 35 minutes compared to 5 minutes or 10 minutes, and that does make a difference. That ping was Bobby hitting her head on the leg of the table.
That's it.
But she's okay. How about you?
What do I want to leave in 2025? I want to leave
and start in 2026.
And start in 2026, or
something
vice
like
versa.
that. Yeah.
What do I want to leave in 2025? God, that is a hard question. Why have I put that on the list? I think I want to leave sort of those unhelpful habits, like maybe like doubt in 2025.
Oh, just those simple things.
Just that simple whole massive package of doubt. And take a leaf out of
like Danny's
book and just put some stuff out there and see what happens. So yeah, doubt in relation to kind of like creative practice and creative work, and just kind of do it.
I guess then you've got to putting words in your mouth, but I guess you've got to then refocus energy then, haven't you?
Yeah, I think it is definitely like a reframe of how
where energy is spent,
for sure.
Yeah, because it doesn't feel like at the end of 2025 you've got any energy to spare.
No.
Right?
Yeah.
So
I'm waiting for those mince pies.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I'm already at the table.
Yeah.
With the turkey, so it's hard.
How do you? Yeah. What are those bits you're gonna cut out? Maybe it is just purely, like you say, energy is literally energy. Sorry, doubt is energy sapping.
Absolutely.
And therefore, maybe if you just doubted less, then you'd have more energy.
Well, the longer you kind of think about, oh, should I do this? Should I not do this? Should I do this? Should I not do this? You're right. That a whole lot of energy is gone, and a whole lot of time has gone as well. So, I think it's kind of like just having that braver approach. And then
nice, like what you did there, braver brands.
Yeah. And again, that is absolutely taking a leaf out of that newsletter as well. To look at things in a different way and try something new and have that different perspective, which is absolutely what that is all about. And then taking that attitude, I guess, into 2026, and then finding that practice, whatever that is, that doesn't necessarily need an output, but that is just the thing that just fuels you creatively. And on that note, my friends, thank you so much for joining us for
the ramble of all rambles.
Kind of the end of 2025, but the beginning of season 2 Crafted Reality podcast. Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening and watching.
Bye. Thank you for listening to Crafted Reality, our first episode of season 2. I hope you have a wonderful festive season, and we will see you in the new year.